For 30 years, America watched Don Rickles and Johnny Carson light up The Tonight Show with what seemed like the perfect comedy friendship. Night after night, Rickles would mercilessly roast the king of late-night television, while Carson played the perfect straight man, both of them laughing like old friends sharing private jokes. To millions of viewers, they were comedy gold, two legends who genuinely loved and respected each other. But that was all a lie. Behind the cameras and beyond the laughter was a friendship built on performance rather than trust, control rather than loyalty, and ultimately, devastating betrayal. When Johnny Carson walked away from late-night television in 1992, he didn't just retire. He destroyed Don Rickles in the most brutal way possible, and the bitterness that followed would haunt Rickles until his dying day. Before his death, Don Rickles finally revealed the shocking truth about Johnny Carson that would change how America saw their legendary partnership forever. This isn't the heartwarming story of two comedy icons supporting each other through decades of success. This is the dark tale of how Hollywood's most beloved host could smile on camera while coldly crushing the dreams of the man who helped make him famous. What really happened between these two comedy giants? And why did their seemingly unbreakable bond turn into a bitter feud that lasted for decades? The truth will shock you, because everything you thought you knew about Johnny Carson was carefully crafted fiction. Don Rickles wasn't born to be the merchant of venom. He was forged by rejection and desperation. Growing up as the son of Jewish immigrants in Queens, young Donald discovered early that humor was his shield against a world that often seemed hostile. When World War II interrupted his dreams of becoming a serious dramatic actor, Rickles served in the Navy aboard a torpedo boat, watching his contemporaries get famous while he was stuck at sea. After the war, Rickles threw himself into acting, enrolling at the prestigious American Academy of Dramatic Arts. He had dreams of Shakespeare, of serious films, of being respected as a true artist. Instead, he faced constant rejection. Casting directors took one look at the short, balding guy from Queens and showed him the door. The frustration was eating him alive until desperation forced him into the last resort: stand-up comedy. At first, Rickles tried conventional jokes, the same material every other comedian was using. He bombed. Night after night, he died on stage until one fateful evening when hecklers started interrupting his act. Something snapped inside him. Instead of cowering, Rickles unleashed a barrage of cutting insults that brought the house down. The audience laughed harder at his angry comebacks than they ever had at his rehearsed material. In that moment, Don Rickles discovered his superpower. He could insult anyone and somehow make them love him for it. But it was one night in Miami Beach that changed everything. Sitting in the audience was Frank Sinatra, the most dangerous man in show business. Rickles spotted him and didn't hesitate. "Make yourself at home, Frank." Hit somebody. The room held its breath. Everyone knew Sinatra's reputation, but here was this unknown comedian daring to mock him to his face. Sinatra could have destroyed Rickles with a single word. Instead, he laughed, and just like that, Rickles had the most powerful endorsement in Hollywood. What Rickles didn't know was that this pattern, walking the razor's edge between humor and disaster, would define his entire relationship with Johnny Carson. Because years later, when Carson became the undisputed king of late-night television, Rickles would discover that some lines should never be crossed, no matter how much the audience laughed. When Don Rickles first walked onto the Tonight Show stage in 1965, Johnny Carson had no idea he was inviting his future tormentor into America's living room. What started as a single guest spot quickly became an addiction, not just for audiences, but for Carson himself. There was something about Rickles that brought out a side of Johnny that viewers had never seen before. Their chemistry was electric because it was built on perfect contrast. Carson was smooth, controlled, and impossibly polished. Rickles was chaos incarnate, loud, unpredictable, and fearless. Together they created television magic that had never existed before and has never been replicated since. Audiences tuned in not just to see Carson's monologue, but to witness the beautiful destruction that happened when Don Rickles was unleashed. The legendary moments came fast and furious. There was the night in 1976 when Carson discovered his cigarette box broken and marched across the studio to confront Rickles on the set of his own show, creating an impromptu piece of television history. 2 years later, during Carson's anniversary special, Rickles turned what should have been a respectful tribute into a ruthless roast, joking that Johnny changed wives like most people change cars. Carson sat there with his trademark smile, letting Rickles tear him apart while America laughed until their sides hurt. But what audiences didn't see was the power dynamic beneath the laughter. Johnny Carson wasn't just the host of The Tonight Show. He was its absolute dictator. Every comedian in America knew that Carson could make or break careers with a single invitation or rejection. Joan Rivers discovered this the hard way when Carson permanently banned her after she launched her own talk show without telling him first. Rich Little found himself blacklisted for mocking Carson too often. Even huge stars walked on eggshells around Johnny, terrified of saying the wrong thing and losing access to the most important platform in entertainment. This made Rickles' position unique and dangerous. He was the only person who could openly mock Carson on his own show and get away with it. Night after night, he insulted Johnny's wealth, his marriages, his aloofness, and his control freak nature. The audience loved it because they felt like they were seeing the real Johnny Carson being taken down a peg. What they didn't realize was that every insult was carefully calculated, every joke designed to stay just inside the boundaries that Carson allowed. Because off camera, Johnny Carson was nothing like the warm, engaging host America saw on television. Colleagues described him as cold, distant, and emotionally unavailable. He rarely socialized with guests after the show ended, preferring to retreat to his private world where he could maintain complete control. The man who made millions laugh every night was often described as one of the loneliest people in Hollywood. And this is where the seeds of betrayal were planted, because Don Rickles made a fatal mistake. He believed their on-screen chemistry translated to real friendship. He thought the laughter they shared meant something deeper. He convinced himself that Johnny Carson actually cared about him as more than just a useful performer. That delusion would eventually destroy him. Behind Johnny Carson's perfectly controlled smile lived demons that would have shocked his adoring public. The man who seemed so stable and trustworthy on television was actually fighting battles with alcohol, anger, and an almost pathological need for control that poisoned every relationship he touched. Carson was married 4 times, and each marriage followed the same devastating pattern. His first wife, Jody Walcott, later described violent outbursts fueled by alcohol and emotional abuse that left her traumatized. His second wife, Joanne Copeland, spoke openly about Carson's drinking problems and what she called his tremendous anger about women. Behind closed doors, the charming host became unpredictable and frightening, a man whose insecurities exploded into destructive rage. The alcohol was just part of a larger problem. Carson's complete inability to trust or connect with anyone on a genuine level. He was obsessed with maintaining control over every aspect of his life, from his television show to his personal relationships. When things didn't go according to his plan, the mask would slip and reveal someone capable of shocking cruelty. This extended to his role as a father. When his son Richard died in a car accident in 1991, Carson made a decision that revealed the depth of his emotional detachment. He refused to attend his own son's funeral, claiming his presence would create a media circus. It was a choice that showed how Carson prioritized his public image over his most important relationships, even in moments of unimaginable grief. All of this added a sinister layer to his friendship with Don Rickles. When Rickles joked about Carson's marriages, his wealth, and his aloofness, he was accidentally exposing truths that Carson desperately wanted to keep hidden. The audience laughed, but Johnny was allowing someone to publicly mock his deepest vulnerabilities. It was a dynamic that couldn't last forever, because eventually Carson would need to reassert control, and that control would come in the form of the most devastating betrayal in entertainment history. By 1992, Johnny Carson was ready to step away from The Tonight Show after 30 years of unprecedented success. The question everyone in Hollywood was asking was simple. Who would inherit the throne of late-night television? To Don Rickles, the answer seemed obvious. He had been Carson's most frequent guest, appearing over 100 times. He had shared the stage with Johnny more than almost anyone else. Most importantly, he had a unique chemistry with audiences that had been proven night after night for decades. Rickles believed, and later claimed he had been led to believe, that Carson supported his bid to become the new host. After all, who understood the rhythm of The Tonight Show better than the man who had been part of its magic for so long? In Rickles' mind, it wasn't just logical. It was a promise that had been made through years of friendship and mutual respect. But Hollywood isn't built on friendship. It's built on business. NBC executives had already made their choice, and it wasn't the 66-year-old insult comic from Queens. They wanted Jay Leno, a younger performer with a safer image who could appeal to middle America without scaring away advertisers. To the network, it was a simple business decision. To Don Rickles, it was the ultimate betrayal. What made the rejection even more devastating was Carson's role in it. Instead of fighting for his longtime friend, Johnny remained silent. Instead of using his enormous influence to support Rickles, he stepped aside and let the network choose someone else. Worse, according to sources close to Rickles, Carson had apparently led him to believe he had a real chance, making the final disappointment that much more crushing. The bitterness that followed was immediate and intense. Friends reported that Rickles spoke harshly about Carson in private, calling him a liar and accusing him of leading him on for years. The man who had made his career out of public insults now found himself genuinely wounded by private betrayal. He reportedly told people that their entire friendship had been an act, a performance for television that Carson had never taken seriously. For Rickles, this wasn't just about losing a job opportunity. It was about discovering that decades of what he thought was genuine friendship had been nothing more than professional convenience. The laughter they had shared, the chemistry that had entertained millions, the bond that seemed so real, all of it had been carefully managed by Carson for maximum television impact. As Carson enjoyed his retirement in privacy and luxury, Rickles carried the weight of that betrayal with him. Though he continued performing and appearing on television, those close to him noticed a change. The playful barbs about Carson took on a sharper edge. The jokes became weapons designed to wound rather than entertain. Behind the public facade, Don Rickles was processing the painful truth that his greatest professional relationship had been built on lies. The end came on January 23, 2005, when Johnny Carson died from complications of emphysema at age 79. For America, it was the loss of a cultural icon. For Don Rickles, it was something far more complicated, the death of the man who had both made and broken his heart. The very next night, The Tonight Show held a special tribute episode. Jay Leno, the man who had gotten the job Rickles wanted, stepped aside to honor his predecessor. Among the guests celebrating Carson's life was Don Rickles, sitting alongside Ed McMahon and Bob Newhart, the surviving members of Carson's inner circle. When the cameras rolled, Rickles did something surprising. Instead of unleashing the bitterness he had carried for over a decade, he chose grace. He called Carson the best straight man a comedian could ever hope for, and described him as a complicated genius. It wasn't a sugar-coated farewell. Rickles didn't pretend their friendship had been perfect or that the pain had never existed. Instead, he acknowledged both Carson's brilliance and his complexity, giving him credit for his professional gifts while subtly acknowledging the personal cost of knowing him. Coming from Don Rickles, who had never shied away from brutal honesty, those words carried enormous weight. He could have used Carson's death as an opportunity for revenge, revealing the private conversations and broken promises that had caused him so much pain. Instead, he chose to honor what had been genuinely great about their partnership while acknowledging its limitations. For Rickles, Carson's death represented more than the end of a complicated friendship. It was the closing of an era in entertainment that would never return. The generation of comedians who had built American comedy culture was disappearing, and with Carson's passing, Rickles found himself among the last survivors of a golden age. The truth about Don Rickles and Johnny Carson isn't the heartwarming story of friendship that millions of viewers thought they were witnessing. It's a darker tale about the price of fame, the illusion of celebrity relationships, and the devastating cost of believing that professional chemistry equals personal loyalty. Their partnership created some of the greatest moments in television history, but it was built on a foundation of carefully managed expectations and ultimately broken promises. Don Rickles spent decades making people laugh by tearing them down with surgical precision. But in the end, it was Johnny Carson who delivered the cruelest cut of all, letting him believe in a friendship that existed only when the cameras were rolling. The king of late-night television may have been beloved by millions, but for the merchant of venom, he was the source of the deepest wound that never quite healed.